Welcome to the cetacean session of the Southwest Marine Ecosystems series. This is the second of three that are hosted by the University of Exeter. Different partners have been hosting different parts of the network over the next few months. I'm Brendan Godley and I work at the Penryn campus of the University of Exeter, which you can see behind me from the air. I'll be your chair today, but I wanted to acknowledge that all the hard work organising today's meeting was done by Megan Francis, who coordinates the Exeter Marine Initiative and all the great social media and events that we try and support, and by the speakers themselves. We have four speakers today who will speak for approximately 15 minutes and have 5 minutes for questions each. And we'll finish pretty promptly at 2:30, but we are recording the meeting and it will be hosted on the Southwest Marine Ecosystem site that's been set up to do that. And you'll be emailed with that link later if you miss some of the stuff at the beginning or some of the stuff at the end. So without further ado, we're going to invite up Shauna Corr, who's a recent graduate from the MRes in marine biology at the University of Plymouth, and she's going to present her thesis research that she did whilst there. So over to Shauna now to now feel nervous and upload the slides. We can see your slides now. That's all looking great. Cool. And over to you, Shauna. Thank you very much. Shauna, you're muted.
Sorry.
There we go. Start again.
Okay. So I'm Shauna, and I've spent the last year researching the resident population of bottlenose dolphins around the south coast of England on behalf of the Southwest Bottlenose Dolphin Consortium. And I thought I'd start today with a bit of an intro to bottlenose dolphins before talking about the previous work that's been done around the coast and what I found this year. So bottlenose dolphins occur in a wide range of habitats, from estuaries and bays to the vast open ocean, and can be subdivided into two ecotypes, the coastal and the offshore. Now, these two ecotypes can interact with one another, but they're distinct populations with different genetics, habitat, behaviour and prey, and in some areas they've even been shown to have some morphological differences, such as differences in size and nasal forms. And that's not the only separation in the bottlenose world. Even coastal populations can be distinctive from one another. They can either be geographically segregated from others or have a specialised adaptation to a particular region, such as a foraging technique, which can cause them to become distinct over time, with many coastal populations actually showing to be genetically distinct from one another. So here are a few fun examples of distinctive behaviours. On the left, we have a bottlenose dolphin community in Shark Bay, Australia, and they've learned to put marine sponges on their beaks whilst foraging, and it's thought that they do this to protect their beaks when searching for bottom-dwelling fish. And on the bottom right, we have a community of coastal bottlenoses in Brazil, which have learned to work with local fishermen to herd mullet into their nests, whilst also catching some fish for themselves. And in the top right are some bottlenoses in Savannah who've actually learned how to forage behind commercial shrimp trawlers. And although coastal populations can differ from one another, they do have some big similarities and some big differences with offshore populations. Coastal populations are usually small, travelling in groups of 2 to 15 close to shore. They prefer shallow waters up to around 60 metres deep and can have distinctive home ranges around the coast. Offshore populations, on the other hand, are large, usually in the hundreds, even into the thousands, and although they can come in close to shore, they mostly spend most of their time travelling expansive distances off the continental shelf. And although both ecotypes are exposed to threats in the marine environment, coastal communities are particularly vulnerable, and this is due both to their low numbers and their proximity to humans. Their small population sizes mean they are less genetically diverse compared to larger offshore populations, and so they're less resilient to disease and pollution. And due to the limited numbers of reproducing females in these small populations, they may also find it difficult to replenish their populations in comparison to larger communities. Luckily, bottlonoses are protected under a variety of different laws in the UK, which require the selection, designation and monitoring of sites which sustain the species. And coastal populations in the UK have previously been protected through special areas of conservation. Currently, the UK has 2, one in the Moray Firth, Scotland, and one in Cardigan Bay, Wales. However, we currently have no specially designated protected areas for bottlenose dolphins in English waters, even though they are frequently sighted. Both for the designation of protected areas, the distribution, abundance, and residency patterns of a population firstly need to be identified. And in 2017, the Southwest Bottlenose Dolphin Consortium formed to achieve just that. The consortium is a collaborative partnership between stakeholders in the region who created a shared database of sighting reports, and members include wildlife tour operators, conservation charities, and members of the public. Bottlenose dolphins' fins are easily scratched and torn, which can leave permanent markings and scars that can be used to identify individuals, much like our own fingerprints. And using the photographic encounters submitted to this database, we could not only identify individuals, but track their movements. And tracking individual dolphins can not only give us information about their range, but also subsequently their abundance, their preferred habitat, which is all really helpful for us when we're trying to understand this population and what we can do to help protect them. So in 2017, with the help of researcher Becky Dudley, they identified a small population around 28 bottlonoses inhabiting coastal areas, mainly centred around Cornwall, with ranging behaviour observed into Devon and Dorset. But there was still very limited knowledge available on this vulnerable population, and it was originally thought that their core use of Cornwall identified may have just been due to biases in sampling technique, as most of the data collected at this point was from contributors who were mainly in Cornwall. So last year, my initial aim was to expand the sighting network into Devon and Dorset and find out much more about how the population uses the southwest coast. However, as small isolated coastal communities are particularly vulnerable to disturbance, I also set out to try to understand the anthropogenic impact on this population by assessing their abundance, survival rates, and identifying detrimental activities in high-risk regions so we can inform policymakers about this population. To achieve this, I needed as many sightings as possible. So at the beginning of the project, I identified and contacted any possibly interested parties and those with frequent contact with coastal waters to see if they'd like to become part of the consortium or contribute some data. I then used press releases, radio interviews, webinars, promotional videos, and social media to encourage sighting submissions from the wider public across the coastline. And at the end of my data collection, over 7,000 sightings of bottlenose dolphins were submitted to the database, with many of these encounters including the videos and photos, which were really helpful and helped me to add a further 169 individuals to our catalogue. As dolphins seen in the same photographed encounter are considered to be associated and therefore within the same community, once I could identify a dolphin, I could also see who they associated with and begin to map who else is within their community, meaning I could separate out sightings from our resident population from others. And these are the analysis results. In the diagram, identified individuals are represented by the square nodes, the size of which corresponds to the number of the time the individual was seen throughout the study. Grey squares indicate individuals seen only once, and blue squares individuals seen on multiple occasions, with the black lines representing associations, which means in this case that they were seen in the same photographed encounter. The analysis identified 21 clusters of 160 permanently marked individuals. The resident population, network A, which is the blue population at the top, was found to be socially distinct from other networks, meaning that there was no encounters submitted which showed them socialising with any of the other populations. And their network consisted of 31 permanently marked individuals who were identified on 86% of encounters. And 94% of encounters of these individuals in Network A were recited on more than one occasion, with 81% seen in multiple years, and therefore this really confirms their residency to our coastline. Networks B to V, on the other hand, consisted of 129 permanently marked individuals seen only on 14% of encounters, and 95% of these were only seen once, and therefore they're more likely to be transient populations or lone individuals such as Danny the dolphin. So analysing the social structure of a population is a really easy way to help us separate out our resident pod from all these sightings. Whilst expanding the sighting network into Devon and Dorset, I also found that population was actually ranging even further. This map here shows all the verified encounters of the resident population in red and other populations identified in the social network analysis in black. And as you can see, the resident population is utilising nearly the whole of the south coast, all the way from North Cornwall to East Sussex. showing that they have like a much wider range than we previously had ever thought. An analysis of individual ranging behaviour found that on average they range around 530 kilometres, although some members were seen to range even up to 760. And more importantly, these individuals were seen to frequently travel large distances very quickly, with 460 kilometres travelled by one individual within just 3 days. So from these results, I established 3 separate sites for further targeted analysis. Site 1 encompassed Cornwall and North Devon, Site 2 South Devon and Dorset, and Site 3 Hampshire and Sussex. Looking into the annual differences between sightings of each of these 3 sites showed that at least 71% of the permanently marked individuals from Network A had been seen in more than one of these sites since 2007, and 45% had been seen within all of the sites. And interestingly, I don't know whether you can see it, whether our videos are over the top of this graph, but on the right in Site 3, sightings have actually increased in recent years, which could be linked to decreases in sighting in Site 1, Cornwall, since 2014, which could possibly indicate a range shift. Although it's unclear whether this is an actual expansion of range or whether use of the region was previously undetected due to low sampling effort. So we really need to focus our future work into collecting present and historical sightings from the wider coastline to understand these long-term trends within for this population. I then looked into their survival rates, and according to the best fit model, survival was constant over time with an individual survival probability of 95%. However, as this estimate only took into account permanently marked individuals due to the opportunistic nature of the sightings received, this means that estimate only captures the survival rate of adults. And although no trends in adult survival were observed, this doesn't necessarily reflect the stability of a population, but could be due to the relatively short span of the study in comparison to the longevity of the species. As this study spans approximately 10 years, but dolphins can live to up to about 50. And although a constant survival rate may suggest no impact from human-related activities in recent years, persistent stressors could have been exerting pressures before data collection began. Therefore, as reproduction and juvenile survival is much more sensitive to environmental change, analysis of calving rates and survival may be more effective for identifying population variation due to human-based pressures and should be investigated more in the future. Due to the wide-ranging nature of this population, I used a multi-site mark recapture framework to assess their abundance across the entire study area, as this method accounts for movement of individuals between study sites and allows for the data to be collected opportunistically in different regions. And this gave a population abundance estimate of 40 individuals, which is significantly lower than other coastal populations in the British Isles, although higher than it was previously estimated in 2017 of 28. Now, this previous estimate estimated their abundance based on a single location and therefore didn't account for the movement of individuals along the coast, which possibly biased results. Therefore, this new abundance estimate does not represent a sudden increase in their population and still highlights just how vulnerable this population is to local extinction, as their abundance is still extremely low. Analysis of their ranges identified 4 core habitat uses, shown here by the red on the map, 3 of which are in Cornwall, 1 around Delston Head, Dorset. However, as our sightings are rather patchy throughout the south, these results are still more likely a representation of where we had lots of sightings submitted, and not actually where the dolphins like to go. And therefore, to get a more realistic idea of their habitat use, which I could then use to assess how vulnerable this population is and where they come into contact with threats in their environment, I need to identify the whole of a population's suitable habitat, which I achieve through MaxEnt modelling. And this method uses environmental data and encounter locations of the population to predict the probability of the population's distribution. And previous work had shown that they do like to stick close to the shore, normally in waters less than 60 metres deep. So it came as no surprise when I did complete this modelling that they were really, their main habitat was hugging the coastline. And once I knew where their distribution was, I then used the spatial data from 3 human activities deemed to be the most detrimental to the population to assess the impact of pressures across the south coast. This map here displays a cumulative impact of these activities, with the warmer colours indicating higher levels of stressor intensity. And shallow coastal waters were found to have a significantly higher impact than deeper waters, with regions prone to the highest levels concentrated around highly urbanised areas and ports, known to have high human densities in industry such as shipping, fisheries and tourism. And to identify regions of high risk to the population, these stressors were then assessed in tandem with the habitat suitability and the vulnerability of the population to each specific activity. And the results of which are displayed in this map, with the height of the bar chart corresponding to the level of risk. And as you can see, the highest impacted areas are close to the coast and include areas such as the Bristol Channel and the Port of Southampton. Multiple areas of high stressor impact intersected with areas of high habitat suitability, with all of the population's highly suitable habitat experiencing at least some level of moderate human impact and 63 experiencing high human impact. The high level of risk around Hampshire and Sussex is particularly concerning as the population has been spending an increasing amount of time there in recent years, and therefore may display a possible conservational issue if current trends continue. Pollution followed by shipping was shown to influence results the most and therefore exhibit the greatest risk to the population. Consequently, mitigation of these pressures could have a great effect on decreasing the overall impact of human activities to ensure the long-term survival of this population. In recent years, the effect of shipping and particularly recreational boating activity has become a growing concern. In summer months, the South Coast sees a rise in boating traffic, which increases threats such as underwater noise, disturbance, and vessel strike. And these impacts also have the potential to mask communication of the population, hindering both population dynamics and prey detection. In other populations, persistent vessel disturbance have been shown to cause declines in abundance and displacement from preferential habitat. And unfortunately, photographic evidence has indicated that these bottlenose dolphins experience increased interactions with leisure boats and jet skis in summer months. Injuries likely from propellers were seen on 2 bottlenoses semi-resident to Weymouth Bay, and sadly the death of one of these dolphins, locally called Danny, due to vessel strike at the end of last year. In 2013, the death of one of our resident pod calves occurred in the Camel Estuary Padstow and was also attributed to persistent disturbance and strike from a recreational vessel. And due to the small effective size of this population, the loss of one member is significant, but owing to their coastal preference and the high human density of the South Coast, disturbances and these energetic costs are likely just to increase further. And we are really hoping to address these issues of disturbance in the future as one of the most important threats facing this population. Pollution was also highlighted as an issue that we need to curb, which confirms the work of Paul Jepson, who identified PCB lipid concentrations of bottlenose dolphins in the Northeast Atlantic to be amongst the highest observed in cetaceans worldwide. But due to patchy data available on coastal pollutions, there's still likely to be an underestimation of the true impact for this population. Fishing was also seen as a lower risk compared to others in the study, but still poses a significant risk. But as there are kind of low bycatch rates for bottlenose dolphins in the Northeast Atlantic, it's more likely that this is exerting its pressure through habitat degradation or vessel disturbance. And as overfishing in the English Channel has already been highlighted as a major factor affecting biodiversity in the area, it may actually be very beneficial if we could curb this particular threat, as bottlenose dolphins previously have been shown to be able to live in areas of high human intensity if they have lots of prey. So in conclusion, this year I found that this population ranges more widely than previously thought, with much of their habitat impacted by human-based stresses. And due to this high level of exposure and their low abundance, effective management of the population is greatly needed to ensure the long-term viability of this population. The designation of fixed protected areas are commonly used in the management of coastal populations. However, to be successful, these need to include a high proportion of the population's habitat, which is challenging for highly mobile communities due to their large range and changing ecological needs. Therefore, mitigation of some of these pressures in identified areas of high risk may be more beneficial for the long-term survival of a small population. But of course, our research doesn't stop there, as we've got so much more to learn about this population. So master's student Saskia Duncan is going to be continuing the work later this year. So please watch out for more of her events and follow us on Facebook to keep up to date on this pod and our research. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Shauna. That was great. And I'm not surprised at all to see that if that's your master's work, that you've managed to secure a PhD place starting in the autumn. So well done. We've got a wee bit of a shy audience today. Some people are raising their hands. I would ask, it would be a wee bit easier for us if you can type your questions in the Q&A box. Nigel Mortimer has asked, we are starting to see electric powered crafts such as jet skis. Do you see these as a new threat needing new codes of best practice to be encouraged?
Well, yeah, jet skis has been one of the biggest issues at the moment, I feel, are facing, as well as other boats. But I feel there needs to be a more of a conversation about what's acceptable in the marine environment. I think a lot of people who are renting out jet skis, they don't necessarily understand that following a dolphin all day is actually really detrimental to them. So I think that's something that we're really going to focus on in the future, to really hone in on these ports that are disturbing these animals.
That's great, thank you. Megan has asked, and it was a question that I was also thinking about, do you think these animals don't go to North Devon and the Bristol Channel, maybe because it's busier, or is it a lack of sightings and effort?
It's more of a lack of sightings and effort. So that's one of our blank spots on our map, which we really need to expand into. Historically, there has been evidence of this pod back in the 1990s when a man called Wood was working on it. And he thought that there were some sightings that went across the Bristol Channel into Wales. But yeah, that's a dead spot on our map at the moment. It's something we really need to focus on.
Well, that perfectly segues into a question from Suzanne Beck. Following on from Megan's question, have you cross-matched any photo ID results from these sightings with other catalogues?
No, unfortunately, we have compared them with Cardigan Bay, Wales, over the English Channel to France, and in Cork Islands, but not at the moment. We haven't been able to find any matches.
Brilliant. Shauna, is there anywhere I can read more about your cumulative impacts map? From Emily Haig.
Not at the moment, but this data is being published, and you can always email me if you want, and we can chat more about it.
Great. Ed Harland asks, the Durlston Watchers have sightings going back to 1990. Why do you think the population is expanding eastwards?
That at the moment, I'm unsure, because at the moment we do see this expansion eastwards, but it's unclear whether we just didn't have enough sightings at that point. I mean, we have a partnership with the Durlston Dolphin Watchers. It's just hard to say at the moment whether it's them following fish or whether they've always been there.
Okay. Megan Strachan is asking, what could be done to enforce the rules around cetacean disturbance?
So that's a hard one. I think just education of the public and more outreach at the moment, but it's a really difficult issue to tackle, and it's something that our new master's student is going to be looking into a bit more closely.
Okay, and linked to that, Constance Scher has asked, you mentioned the fixed MCZ being ineffective. How feasible would it be? Oh, someone else jumped the question. How feasible would a mobile MCZ, considering the complex legislation behind MPA designations?
So it is a really difficult issue, and that's what we've been talking about since I've done this work, is how we can protect this population, as mobile protective areas are very expensive logistically and are really challenging in their own right. So we may be thinking now that instead of having a conservation zones, we try to tackle these disturbance issues and other issues that we've identified as threats. Because they travel such a large range now, it's really difficult to get some legislation in place for them, because as soon as we create a fixed area for them, or even a mobile area, it's always going to have to move because they move so quickly.
Okay, and we've got more questions than we've got time for you to answer, but maybe you could do a bit of fiddling about with text answers once you've relaxed a bit. But last one, Bob Earl, the mastermind behind all of this Southwest Marine Ecosystems meetings, says, great talk. Could you say just a little bit more about how Group A moves so quickly over long distances?
Yeah, so tracking their photos, obviously we can see that they were in North Cornwall, and then 3 days later we've got encounters of them in Sussex. So they are moving very, very quickly along the coastline, but to say why they're doing it, we just don't have enough information yet. All
right, well, in this webinar function, it's not possible for everyone to give you a round of applause, so I'm going to give you a round of applause now.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Great job and great answers to great questions. Thank you very much to the participants. And then maybe you can noodle away with any other questions that are in there in the Q&A box once you've just had a wee second to relax. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Duncan Jones, educator, skipper, guide and researcher who's based at Marine Discovery Penzance, and he's going to talk to us about solitary dolphins. So once Shauna unshares.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my computer's frozen.
I wonder, can Megan unshare you while we...
There you go, it should work now. Sorry.
Great, no problem.
Okay.
And without further ado, over to Duncan.
Just sorting out my share.
It's looking good.
Although my slideshow won't start at the moment. That's weird. My slideshow's frozen. If I just quickly close it and open it again.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. Oh, there it is. It's behind. Hang on. Right. Oh. Don't really want to start on your first slide, do you?
Everybody close your eyes.
What has gone on here? There we go. Right. Okay.
Okay.
So hi. Yeah. So Brendan's introduced me, so I won't introduce myself again. It's great to be following on from Shauna's great research because that helps with the understanding of some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about. And this isn't any new research of mine. This is really a bit of a literature review of what other people have found about solitary dolphins. So what am I trying to get across? And so typically we consider dolphins are naturally gregarious animals and that they live in communities. So why do they become solitary? And then why in some cases does this solitary nature of some of them lead them to become isolated? But then also from our point of view, how do we then maximize the likelihood of them rejoining their community? So solitary dolphins have been recorded since the time of the Greeks. So go back quite a long way. There's a charity, the Marine Connection, that Liz Sanderman runs. They've done quite a lot of work looking into solitary cetaceans. And they have a great report on their website, the Lone Rangers report, which is well worth a read, which is where the data for this slide comes from. But you can see that lots of different species can be recorded as solitary social animals as well. But overwhelmingly, it seems to be bottlenose dolphins that we find in this situation. I'll talk about the difference between solitary and solitary social as we go on. So here are some of the current theories as to why cetaceans or dolphins in particular can become solitary and then also social solitaries. And it could be down to food availability, predator disturbance and reproductive strategy, becoming separated from their group or loss of their first order companion. A first order companion would be a dolphin that they spend the majority of their time with. And then it could be something to do with life stage. So if a dolphin reaches a certain life stage and then there are no dolphins within its community at that similar life stage, it might go somewhere else for interaction. The idea that they may become a social outcast. So there's a couple of instances in Wilkie's study where they talked about dolphins that they thought might be deaf. And so the deafness might have made it hard for them to interact within their own community. And so they became socially isolated and then they seek out human behavior, human contact to replace the need for social interaction. And in both cases, the deaf dolphins were actually hit by boats and died. And then finally, the lifestyle choice. And actually in areas like Sarasota Bay in Florida and Shark Bay in Australia, where bottlenose dolphins have been extensively studied, they find that there are both male and females that choose to spend time alone. So they actually lead a solitary life within their community, and they only have contact with others for courtship and mating. So it's not necessarily such an unusual thing to be a solitary dolphin. And then typically, why more bottlenose dolphins? So generally, what the researchers answer to this is that the fission fusion society structure that bottlenose dolphins live within. So this coming together and moving apart, where they've done focused studies following particular animals within a pod, they can find that even within 6 hours, they will have multiple contact at different social levels with different dolphins, and so they're not in like a pod structure all the time. Although a lot of small dolphin species have the fission fusion society structure of bottlenose dolphins, so it might just be that we see more of the solitary social bottlenose dolphins because they live in a coastal situation close to us, and it's easier for them to survive on their own, whereas other species might not survive so well or might just be out of our sight. Bottlenose dolphins as well, their communities have been more impacted by humans. So typically, hundreds of years ago, we probably would have had bottlenose dolphin communities all around the coast of the UK. And now we have these, as Shauna showed, 3 very distinct separate populations. And so if you live in a small community, particularly like the Southwest one, when you're a young dolphin coming of age and you're seeking companions of a similar age, and there are none, then it may be that you leave your community to try and find other companions of the similar life stage. And actually, we know that bottlenose dolphins reach maturity between the age of 4 and 13. It depends on where in the world and various other factors. That's why there's such a wide range there. And quite interestingly, when these social solitary dolphins turn up, their age estimates are often somewhere around the 5 to 10 years old. So put them in this category. And then is it a temporary thing? Is it a permanent thing? What changes it from being temporary into becoming a permanent situation? So like I said, we know that in dolphin communities, we get dolphins that choose to be solitary, that choose to live a more solitary lifestyle. But what changes that into becoming one that becomes more socially dependent on humans? So the longest lived social solitary dolphin was Fungi, and he disappeared in October in 2020 at the same time as Danny, actually. Interestingly, when he turned up in 1983, they estimated he was around 5 years old, and then they estimated 2019 that he was 40. So he seemed to be able to live his whole life as a social solitary dolphin without too much impact on his health or on his situation. There probably were disturbance issues and so on, and it's thought that he died of old age. So are there things we can learn from Fungi? Was it because when he came into knowledge, it was before social media existed and before current modern communication methods existed, and that kept him able to live his life without too many of the issues that some of our social solitaries seem to face? We don't know, but maybe there are lessons we can learn from Fungi. Looking at solitary dolphins in the Southwest, there have been more than just the ones I've got here, but Beaky was one of the first ones that was more well known about, had a film made about him. He was around 1972 to 78. And actually Dolphin Disturbance has been around for a long time because Beaky had a gunshot wound scar on his head somewhere. So someone had tried to shoot him at some point. But he was an interesting dolphin. He traveled from the Isle of Man to Wales. He was recorded in Cornwall. And then we have Georges, or Donny when he was in Ireland, Georges when he was in France. And again, he was a well-traveled dolphin. And this was considered to be something quite exceptional, the distance these animals were traveling. But then lower down the list, we've got Clet, who turned up in 2008, who also made a long journey. And then Danny, who was previously, before Danny, known as Pierre and Splashy, also traveled around a bit. So is it that these dolphins are seeking out, looking for something, maybe another community to join? We don't know, but it was thought that these solitary dolphins had very short ranges, but they do, but they also seem to move as well and move between areas. Cookie and Sleeky are on there. That's 2 dolphins, so it's really not a solitary dolphin, but they're quite interesting. I'm going to talk about a few of these different animals. So Clet, he traveled a long distance. He was quite a battered dolphin, and most of these injuries and marks are probably from conspecific, so from interacting with other bottlenose dolphins. And Clet, first of all, arrived in Finistère, so down in France at the bottom of the map, and was known about there between 2008 and 2011. Then he travelled across to Cornwall and turned up in Newlyn and travelled over to the Isles of Scilly and around the Cornish coast, probably as far up as Plymouth, where we saw records. And then from there disappeared across to Ireland and spent most of the summer of 2014 running around Baltimore in West Cork. My friend who runs tours out of there had the company of Clet for most of that season, and then was actually recorded up in Doolin with Dusty, who is a solitary dolphin up there, past where the Shannon population of bottlenose dolphins are. And then after that arrived on the west coast of Scotland, was seen around Douglas, the Isle of Man, and then later, again 2015, turned up around the Cornwall coast, but was recorded further west as far as Portland this time. Then he disappeared, but then 3 years later reappeared in July 2018 and was seen in Whitsands Bay with 40 other bottlenose dolphins, so possibly had found another community to join. What I find interesting about Clet's map is the areas that he was recorded, that he visited, are all areas closer to where we have these resident populations, the southwest population, then the population of the Shannon estuary, and then the Scottish location. He's moving up towards the Barrow population of bottlenose dolphins as well. So, you know, was he deliberately visiting areas where there might be populations, or is that just coincidence, or was he just recorded in those areas? But interesting movements. So Cookie and Sleeky, they were a pair of dolphins. Cookie had a very distinctive fin, and Cookie's behavior was much more like a solitary social dolphin, and Sleeky was more along for the ride. And now they were recorded 2008 and 9, just around the Cornish coast, until Cookie disappeared. And then Sleeky actually rejoined the Southwest pod and is now known as White Strike. These names as well are not names I've given dolphins. We tend to seem to give very odd names. A bit of anthropomorphism there, and we get a bit crazy with them. But anyway, so Cookie disappeared, and I mean, he's got a very obvious fin and has not been recorded since 2009, so we assume he's dead. We don't know that. But yeah, Sleeky then joined the pod. Had it been the other way around, I wonder if Cookie would have become a more intense social solitary dolphin. Talking about ranges as well, these guys were once recorded in Foy in the morning, in Penzance at lunchtime, then back in Foy for the evening. The newspaper story around that was breakfast in Foy, lunch in Penzance, afternoon tea in Foy. And there was one occurrence where they seemed to move quite a lot. And that brings me on to Splashy, or Danny, Pierre or Danny, who was really the catalyst for me doing this talk. And so Danny initially turned up and was named off Nuki as Splashy, and spent the first part of his life, the first part of being a solitary sociable dolphin around the Cornish coast. And he would very much interact with boats, but not with swimmers. It was an interesting one. He would suddenly turn up. He would kind of appear from nowhere, bow ride, hang around, then disappear. And interactions were very much on his terms. And well, certainly when we saw him. But the last time we saw him was March 2018. And after that, he seemed to disappear up to Portland and Weymouth and Poole area, where he spent a bit longer, 2018 to 2020. And Shauna mentioned in her talk that he died from a propeller strike, probably from a large ship, they think. Interesting that he moved his range east, also at the time where we were having less bottlenose dolphin sightings to the west of their range and more to the east. So that makes you wonder, was he tracking the population? So was he a solitary dolphin that had contact with the, had contact with the main community? And actually, in all cases of recorded solitaries, at some stage in their life, and often some of them quite regularly, they are seen to interact with other dolphins. So they aren't as isolated necessarily as we think. And so Danny's fate in October 2020 brings us onto the management situation. And Shauna was talking about the threats to bottlenose dolphins. And if you imagine those threats for a solitary on its own, they're magnified. The inshore nature certainly greatly exposes them to more risk, increases their exposure to risk. We also have this issue of where they'll inhabit a range, a restricted range for a long period of time, even years, and that can lead to much more intense human interaction as the local population and a wider population become aware of them. So fungi, is a massive tourist attraction. Nowadays, media and social media gives them way more exposure, and we can obviously try and use some of that to educate as well. But the impact of spreading their pictures around on social media is invariably more negative as the awareness of them rises. And it gives us the ability to have constant location updates. We even see commercial operators who are WISE accredited going live with dolphins. And that's just telling people where they are and when they are where they are. So this immediacy and this presence in the media can cause them problems. We saw this with Dave the dolphin off the Folkestone coast, who was mobbed by people regularly, and despite having lots of mitigations and lots of meetings and lots of education, ended up dying probably from a boat strike. This perception of ownership can also be a problem. So where we get these solitaries, we name them, and people take ownership of them, and they like to think that they're the dolphin's special person. And that's great, but it can also lead to kind of conflicts between groups and can reduce our ability to act as a collective to protect them. And often the problem with the solitaries, and when they become more social, is when they start to interact with swimmers. And through anthropomorphism, we perceive animals' behaviors through human eyes. So those interactions can often lead to misunderstanding and injury, and particularly in the case of assimilation, where the dolphin then may respond to the human as if it's another dolphin. And if you're in the water swimming with a bottlenose dolphin and it decides to socially interact with you as it would another bottlenose dolphin, you're going to become very injured, if not dead. So these are some of the threats and the issues. And in fact, there are two known cases where people were killed by wild social solitary bottlenose dolphins, one in the Canaries and one in Brazil, after interactions in the water. So these are the problems. What do we do about managing these? What are the solutions? Well, by far the best solution is keeping the animal quiet. So this happened in South Australia. Solitary dolphin turned up, and they were able, the people who first realized that this dolphin was hanging around the area on its own, separate from its population, had enough knowledge to realize that keeping quiet was the best thing. And they managed to kind of keep this hidden from the general public, and the dolphin assimilated into another pod passing by, and that all ended well. Education is important, although in the case of Dave the dolphin off Folkestone, there was pretty wide attempts to educate the public, and that still ended quite badly. So education needs to be managed carefully. Often we use social media for education, but social media equally spreads awareness that these animals are there. Management related to boats and swimmers and commercial operations is important, and we do have laws in place, but at the moment they're not really enforced, and our management is quite patchy and sporadic and often voluntary. But certainly, speaking with Colin Speedy, the biggest threat to cetaceans with boats is speed. If you have speed, then you have the ability to chase. If you have speed, you're more likely to collide. I think there's a few studies that show that the likelihood of collision with a cetacean exponentially increases when boat speed goes up over 10 knots. We talk about distances, but they're very hard to measure. And really, in order to interact with cetaceans in a boat with minimizing your impact, you need to develop a strong understanding of their behavior. Swimmers, again, if we're really truly trying to give these animals the best chance of reconnecting with their own pods, then we need to try and reduce their dependency on humans. So what is thought in most of the literature is that these dolphins are seeking out human contact to replace the social need that they have, that they're missing from other species. And so if they're getting it from their species, if they're getting it in a location, then they're more likely to stay there. The longer they stay there, the more likely they're going to become a fungi. And if they're not managed properly as a fungi, then the more likely they're going to end up a Dave who dies from a boat strike or something similar. Obviously, commercial operations, it's important to think about environmental risk assessment and robust mitigations. You know, when there are known about solitary social dolphins in an area, their risk from pile driving or any other events, any other commercial operations are going to be higher. I know in Wilkie's study, they talk about risks from oil pollution events and dolphins, solitary dolphins dying from those kind of events. People management is the most important thing. And where they've done that most successfully, they've had what they called supported wardens. So there was a case of a solitary dolphin in Marseille where they had supported wardens, like volunteer members of the public to act as wardens, but supported by the local university so that they could develop a wider understanding of cetacean populations rather than having just specific knowledge to that dolphin. And but they also need to be backed up by authority, by the police, because trying to deal with the members of the public as a volunteer is very difficult. And this did happen in the case of Dave the dolphin, again off the Kent coast. The wardens would had a contact number for the police, and there were instances. There was actually a prosecution of 2 people there for disturbance and harassment. Sorry, my voice is going. It's also important to keep the research up to date, and the research needs to inform the management process. So when we have these solitary dolphins in place, we need to be developing our understanding of what's happening and how the interaction with the public is happening, and use this to update how we manage them and manage people's interaction with them. It's interesting, in Nunney and Simmons' paper, they suggest that any deliberate interaction with a solitary social dolphin could be considered as an offence under UK law. So the UK law states, you know, the Wildlife and Countryside Act, that it's an offence to recklessly endanger cetaceans, and endangerment is considered anything that prevents them from performing their normal processes that they need to achieve their normal life. And if you interact with a social solitary dolphin, effectively you're making it less likely that dolphin will rejoin its natural population, and so therefore you're affecting its ability to reproduce, and also you're taking its rest time and its feeding time. So in theory, they argue that any interaction with them could be considered an offence. I think that's a bit of an extreme case, and I guess in reality, anything in moderation is what we say is it's the case of how do we moderate public hysteria around solitary bottlenose dolphins. Anyway, that's my brief overview of the literature on solitaries and some of the problems they face. Thanks for listening, and any questions?
Thank you very much, Duncan. Time's getting away from us a wee bit, but if I could paraphrase 2 questions, one from Megan and one from Doug. There have been suggestions that these animals might be deaf. Do they have the same vocal repertoire as other dolphins? Has anybody looked at that with a pod or something? And then also Doug talks about, there was one called George off the National Marine Aquarium, and who was a child psychologist, and she suggested that it might be autistic. Do you think there's anything in that?
So the deaf idea, yeah, there's definitely been instances where there have been solitary dolphins that were deaf. There were 2 cases I talked about, and Wilkie's study talks about them too. And so, yeah, that's definitely one theory. It's not the case of all solitary social dolphins that they're deaf. In both those cases, although they could feed themselves, they were run over and killed by boats. Yeah, George, he was George, the one I was talking about, also known as Randy. as well. I guess he could have been autistic. I don't know how you identify autism in a dolphin. It would take, I guess, a lot of study, and we're seeing a snapshot, even with these solitaries, of what they're actually up to. It took years with even fungi for them to realize that he was interacting on occasion with other bottlenose dolphins, and so then to try and establish if a dolphin is exhibiting what would be considered autistic behavior compared to another normal functioning dolphin would be very difficult, but it would be interesting to try and understand that. I mean, having said all that, in the cetacean world, we see cetaceans looking after disabled. There's the famous case of the pod of orcas who feed the disabled orca, and so also, would they look after them as well? We don't know that disabilities would mean that they'd be segregated from a pod. Yeah, things to look at.
Yeah, and as this the Southwest Marine Ecosystems meeting is supposed to, it's generating some other snippets of information there. Duncan, if you could go in and mine that in the comments and in the Q&As, and also if you might have a chance to answer some of the questions that we haven't been able to touch on.
Yeah.
And just leave the answers there so other people can see it, and then towards the end we'll press it as done, and then we can move on to the next set of questions. So again, my round of applause on behalf of everybody else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So if you could unshare your screen, please, Duncan. And next up, we have Dan Jarvis from BDMLR, which is the hardest acronym in the world to say. And he's going to talk to us about live cetacean strandings in Southwest 2019 to 20. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks very much, Brendan. I'll just do the screen sharing part, and hopefully has that come up now?
All good. Speaking to the muted microphone comedy.
Okay. All right then, so thank you, Brendan, and thank you everyone for joining us here on the seminar today for Southwest Marine Ecosystems. I'm going to be just running through, I've cherry-picked a few cases just to highlight from the last couple of years of live stranded cetaceans that we've dealt with the British Divers Marine Life Rescue from around Southwest England. I'll mention a little bit with some of them, some of the post-mortem findings as well, as some of them have been quite interesting. And then towards the end, we're just going to look a little bit at the distribution of these live strandings and a breakdown of the species that we're seeing as well. So to start with our case studies, back in January of 2019, right at the beginning of January 2019, we had a common dolphin live strand in Penzance Harbour. It's extremely emaciated, one of the thinnest dolphins I've ever seen. And it actually died really quickly, so there wasn't really much we could do, but obviously our option would have been to euthanize this animal had it lasted a few more minutes. It was quite an interesting animal as well in another respect, because as you can see in the bottom left photo, it had a old injury where the dorsal fin had been severed in half, but clearly this had happened quite some time ago and was well peeled over. This actually turned out on post-mortem examination by James Barnett, who is with the Cornwall Wildlife Trust Marine Strandings Network / Cetacean Strandings Investigation Programme. He found it to be quite an elderly animal. Certainly it had been pregnant a number of times over the years, and potentially showed signs of having recently had an abortion. But this animal unfortunately was suffering quite a severe infection, which evidently had led to its compromised condition and stranding in Penzance Harbour.
Dan, sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering if you could pull your laptop a wee bit closer to you. There's a bit of a mic issue going on. I thought it was bandwidth to start with, but it does sound to be more like your mic. So maybe just a bit more of a booming baritone and we'll be sorted.
Fair enough. I'll try and bear that in mind. Thanks. Then Also in early January of 2019, we had a pair of live strandings in St Ives Bay. The first one, which is the animal that you can see on the left side, is at Jarvis Bay, reported early in the morning. This animal had actually already died by the time we got there. But while we were actually there recording this animal for the Wildlife Trust Marine Network, there was another live stranded animal reported across the bay, again another common dolphin between Hale and Gwythian. This one appeared to be doing much better, of course, when we got there, and we did attempt to refloat it, and unfortunately didn't respond very well, and eventually we had to go for the option of euthanasia in this case. Both animals went off for post-mortem examination with James again, and interestingly, the Jarvis Bay dolphin appeared to be showing gas bubble disease or decompression sickness, which is what divers get when they surface too rapidly. So that was a really interesting finding in that one, as we very rarely see that in cetaceans. The other dolphin largely had unfortunately suffered the effects of having been life branded for too long. One of its lungs, where it had been lying over on one side, was quite seriously damaged, unfortunately, and this had eventually led to it not being viable for refloat, unfortunately, hence why we struggled to refloat it at the time. Also around this time in February, we were getting a lot of reports of groups of common dolphins coming up into estuarine areas along the south coast, going up as far as South Devon. We also had quite a few, particularly going up past the King Carry Ferry, up into the creeks above the Carrick Roads area, which we generally regard as a bit of a warning sign that you know these dolphins could be at quite high risk of live stranding. Common dolphins are not particularly used to operating in highly intertidal areas, and certainly the estuaries of the Fell and the Halford are both very well known to us as stranding hotspots for otherwise usually quite healthy animals, but just otherwise seem to have been caught out by the tides and the mudflats and the shallow waters around there. This incident here in the pictures was a very notable one. We had 10 common dolphins, including young calf, that had come all the way up to Penryn, a really long way up the river, practically as far as they could go near Islington Wharf. And they remained there for the whole morning. They were monitored by our volunteers throughout the morning, some of whom had come from the university, as we run training courses there. And they've been monitoring them, and it was over the high tide, and we'd hoped that as the tide went out, they'd just follow the tide back out and would be okay. But after a few hours of observation, it became apparent that this wasn't the case. They actually just stayed in the area, circling ever more tightly and displaying more distressed behaviours, including tail slapping, and on low tide, this area that you can see in the photo at the top, it does pretty much completely dry out, and it's just mudflats. So myself and the harbour master there at Penryn, we actually went into his launch and herded the dolphins downstream very, very gently and carefully so as not to distress them any further. But we were successful in moving them out of danger, and we observed some incredible behaviours during this incident. I've never known anything like this. Two of the dolphins, the ones that you can see in the bottom right photo, they actually split off from the rest of the group and started following each other nose to tail, and you could hear them above the surface, as it was quite a calm and quiet day. You could hear them above the surface making what almost sounded like a duck quacking noise, which I don't think I've really heard dolphins make before. It was really, really unusual. And the dolphin at the front would also sometimes tail slap as well, but it was all slow speed, quite gentle. There was nothing aggressive or anything about it. And it was really, really interesting to observe. The rest of the group sort of went in and out of the marina down halfway between Penryn and Falmouth. And eventually they did move further down. We think they were actually being prevented from moving further down. It was about halfway past Penryn towards Falmouth. There was a ship being loaded up with some rockery or huge amounts of rocks and slate and everything, and it was really, really loud, and we think this was preventing them from going any further downstream. But once that had actually stopped, they did then move past that area and went right down by the Maritime Museum, And once again, they started displaying some really interesting behaviour. They actually managed to corral a shoal of fish up against the wall of the Maritime Museum inside the marina and started lunge feeding through the middle of them. And again, you could hear them from above the surface clicking away to each other, and then suddenly they would all come up, or sometimes one at a time would come up rushing through the fish. So it's absolutely incredible behaviour. Certainly they were at high risk of stranding earlier on in the day, but by the time they got to the Maritime Museum in the evening, they were still relaxed enough to actually start feeding in quite a confined and relatively shallow area for common dolphins to be in. So it's quite an amazing experience. The following day, however, we actually had a common dolphin at Myler Bridge, which is one of the creeks just a bit further up the Carrick Roads. And this animal was quite clearly in poor condition, very emaciated, had a number of whale lice parasites on the surface of its body. And this animal, we actually managed to get out to it. It just about stranded just before we got to it anyway, as the tide was going out, but it was in such poor condition we put the animal to sleep. And it was also found on post-mortem to have parasites internally, as well as pneumonia and various infections as well. It was a very, very sick animal. Just as we were finishing up with that animal, we then had a report of 2 more common dolphins within sight of Truro Cathedral, which is quite incredible. Common dolphins, again, going in so far up the stream there, is again very high risk, rings the alarm bells for us at PDMR. So we went up there to monitor them, and luckily they seemed to get out overnight. They weren't seen or heard of again. So we think they've managed to find their way back out to Carrick Roads and back out to open sea. But to get dolphins up that far is just incredible. In March, we had a live stranded harbour porpoise on Porthmeer Beach in St Ives during quite a horrible storm. Certainly we were getting sandblasted on the beach at Porthmeer, and the weather was really, really horrible and the waves were massive. The animal itself seemed to actually be okay. There wasn't any outward signs of ill health or anything like that. It was in reasonable body condition. So we actually just popped it into the back of my car and we drove it around to St Ives Harbour, where it was calm and safe. And we did manage to successfully refloat it on the 3rd attempt. Now, harbour porpoises being refloated isn't something you hear about very often in the world of live strandings, particularly in the UK, where a lot of the cases that we seem to come across are sick and debilitated animals in poor condition. So a lot of the time these animals either are put to sleep or die. So to be able to refloat one, especially given the circumstances of its stranding and the obstacles we had to overcome with it being at night, quite late at night and in horrible weather conditions, was quite an achievement, really. We're going to stick with St Ives Bay once again. It was a really busy year in St Ives Bay in 2019. In April, we actually had a mother-calf pair of common dolphins live strand on Carvis Bay Beach. The calf actually stranded separately from the mother. She was first stranded at one end and the calf stranded actually at the other end of the beach. And while our team were dealing with our first members of the team who arrived started dealing with the mother, the calf stranded at the far end and was actually put back to sea immediately by members of the public who hadn't realised there was a mother stranded at the other end of the beach and couldn't see that far. So our team had to work incredibly quickly to assess the mother. And she was found to be in a reasonable condition, and then to get her refloated back out to the water, as obviously the calf we had to consider was still dependent on her to survive, and we didn't want them to be separated. So again, this animal was refloated successfully, and we hope rejoined her calf. It was a relatively calm day despite the bottom picture, and hopefully they would have been able to hear each other underwater and find each other once again. But certainly we didn't have any live strandings or dead strandings in the aftermath of this. That might indicate they haven't made it, so we had to hope for the best in this case. Later on in summer, again, St Ives Bay, this time on Hale Beach at Mexico Towns, we had a very, very unusual stranding of a neonate pilot whale calf. You can see in the photo, hopefully, there's some pale rings running around its body, which are the fetal folds from when it's tucked up inside its mother before it's born. This was an extremely young animal, and its he died very, very quickly. This is literally in front of my house, so I was the first medic there, and it actually went into a dive reflex within a couple of minutes of me getting to it. It had already been refloated a couple of times by members of the
public. And we're going to just have to watch our time. Sorry to interrupt you in full flow, but to get everything completed on the time, just a wee bit up in cadence. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, sadly this animal died quite quickly again and went off for post-mortem examination, where it appeared to have been fed at some point. It did have a small amount of milk in its stomach, and it also had pneumonia, but interestingly it also had lungworm, which of course could only have been passed to it through its mother, either through her milk or when it was still inside its mum before it was born. So there's very, very few cases of those that have been recorded in cetaceans around the world, so it was quite interesting in that respect. Luckily, there was actually no sign of any of the rest of the pilot whale pod around, as they are well known for mass stranding in these cases. This one's more of a cautionary tale here. This is a common dolphin that live stranded in Southbourne in Dorset in summer 2019. This animal was refloated multiple times by a group of people who were probably on the drunker side of tipsy, unfortunately, and didn't really know what they were doing, and the animal eventually died, sadly. We have a harbour porpoise that live stranded at Wembury in Plymouth as well. Sadly, this one was not in very good condition and died quickly as well. Our medics did get there and started first aid, but there wasn't really much else they could do considering its condition. We had a common dolphin then in December that live stranded on Hale Beach. This animal was in good condition, and we actually, because it was so rough on the day, we actually loaded it up into the back of the sort of off-road beach buggy, golf buggy thing that you can see in the bottom photo, and took it off the beach and took it in a car actually around to Jarvis Bay, where it was much more sheltered, and this animal was successfully refloated as well. In 2020, we of course had the fin whale on the south shore of the Helford River. It didn't last long out of the water. It was a very thin and emaciated animal, clearly hadn't fed for a long time. And a full post-mortem examination was done the following day, which indicated that it was suffering quite a severe infection. We then had, in April, a couple of harbour porpoises hanging around in the River Tone in Somerset. They were there for about a week or two, seen on and off, but they appeared to be in relatively good condition. They then disappeared and we thought they'd found their own way back out, but then a week of no sightings after that, we actually heard one of them was found dead and was sent a photo of it. So obviously one of them had still been around and was potentially poorly in the end. The other animal was never seen or heard from again though. In May, we had a young minke whale that live stranded on the island of St Martin's in the Isles of Scilly. This one was actually put back in the sea before it was reported to us, but again, a little bit of a cautionary tale. This was quite a small animal, potentially dependent on its mother still, and we don't know if its mother was still around. Again, part of our assessment process is trying to reunite calves and mothers to one another if it's actually possible. So this one, we don't know what the outcome really would have been, even though it got put back in the water. This was a very interesting case in Holywell Bay. We had a neonate common dolphin calf that live stranded on the beach. Again, it died very quickly, but it was actually shown, as you hopefully can see in this photo here, to have rake marks from other common dolphins, potentially aggressive interactions as well, which is very unusual for common dolphins. Certainly, as many of you I'm sure already know, we get bottlenose dolphins attacking smaller cetacean species and each other, in fact, but common dolphins, this is a very unusual behaviour and very concerning with such a young animal as well. It hadn't fed at all. There was no sign of it having ever fed. So whatever happened to its mother, we do not know. So this poor little thing had quite a difficult life. And finally, we've got this common dolphin here that's stranded at the far reaches of the Helford at Morgan. This animal was in good condition again, and sort of again relates to the Helford being one of our big hotspots for relatively healthy animals live stranding just because they get caught out by the tide. This animal we actually ended up taking on a boat from a local person who was fortunate enough to be nearby and just in time before the tide went out to get us 5 miles downriver to the mouth of the Helford and release it successfully out into Falmouth Bay. So just breaking this down a little bit with the distribution, in 2019 we had 12 actual strandings and 9 observations of dolphins that we considered potentially at high risk of live stranding around the coast. Those are in yellow red. And in 2020, I've got the stars mixed up at the bottom here. And in 2020, those are the yellow stars. We had 8 actual strandings, 5 observed, and 1 disentanglement of a common dolphin in Tor Bay. That was at sea rather than stranded. I'm just going to focus on West Cornwall a little bit because it is our bigger hotspot of strandings in the area.
Sorry, Dan,
so you can see sort of the Halford and Falmouth. Halford and Falmouth are hotspot areas, and St Ives Bay as well, as you can see. Common dolphins comprise the large majority of the strandings that we get most years. They're one of the most abundant species that we get around the coast here, as well as harbour porpoises sometimes, and then followed by various other species at one time or another. And the outcomes for these animals were, for the porpoises, 1 refloated and 1 died. Common dolphin, 3 were refloated, 3 were euthanized and 9 died. The pilot whale and fin whale both died, and the minke whale was refloated, but with an uncertain outcome. And I'd also add here that Danny the dolphin, who's managed to make an appearance in 3 of our 4 talks today, was actually disentangled 3 times in 4 months during 2019 and 2020 as well. Thank you to all of our colleagues with whom we work around the country to do what we do with rescuing marine wildlife around here. And just a quick plug for our crowdfunder for building a new seal hospital. If anyone can support that, that would be hugely appreciated. And I'll put a link in the comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Round of applause. Dan, we're going to have to do questions in the Q&A box so that Abby's got time to give her talk in time. Abby, don't rush, but you've got your time. So
no, it's fine. It's fine. I appreciate it's the end of a long session, so I will.
And sorry, just to say that there have been some questions and Duncan's been answering them. So if you want to have a look in answered in the Q&A box, you can actually see the questions are there. And then also everybody feel free to type any questions or comments. It's all about interaction. Over to you, Abby. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for Dan for warming you all up with the images of dead animals, which I usually have to do following on from all these joyous live images. So thanks, Dan, and really clear partnership there with us. He's covered a lot of the animals that we investigate as part of our research. And shows how important what we do is, because, you know, recording these animals that wash up around our coast is an invaluable opportunity to discover more about their ecology and biology. So I'm going to be speaking about the Marine Strandings Network and the lessons that we learn from recording Cornwall's dead stranded marine life. Okay. The work I do also represents a whole team of people, what I'm speaking about today, from Ruth and Anthea in the Trust and the Environmental Record Centre to our team of volunteers, the hotline coordinators, the call out volunteers, our pathologist James Barnett, and our partners British Divers Marine Life Rescue and Cornwall Seal Group Research Trust. So there's a whole crew of people behind this talk that I'm just representing. So the Marine Strandings Network, we've been running for over 25 years. We collect data on all organic material that washes up, so anything from fish and sharks, turtles to mollusks and jellyfish, but we do focus on cetaceans and seals for a variety of reasons, but that does come forward in our annual report, which if you read our annual reports, you will see there is a focus on those 2 groups. It is managed by Cornwall Wildlife Trust. The Marine Strandings Network is managed by Cornwall Wildlife Trust. We have this data collection and processing function within the Environmental Record Centre, who support the project, but really its entire function is led by volunteers. We have a 24-hour hotline, and this is when you're all allowed to get your phones out and put that number in your phone immediately. I want 143 new phones with that number in. That runs all year, 24 hours a day, all year round, run by volunteers. And then we have nearly 200 call out volunteers. So we train people every year to go out and record these animals on the beaches around our coast. Now, carcasses that are suitable, they can be assessed on the beach, or if they're suitable, they may go to post-mortem. So I mentioned our pathologist, James Barnett, in the introduction. So, like I said, from this really sad event becomes this invaluable opportunity to observe these creatures, their biology, their ecology, in a really non-invasive, relatively cheap way, and gather that information so we can use it towards their conservation, the management of these animals in our waters. Now, alongside that recording, that core activity of recording and data collection, we have other outputs such as our annual report, which you can download off our website. We run a conference, and I'm really hoping we're going to get a conference in this autumn. Twice yearly training days, and not an online one, sorry. I'm hopeful, probably unrealistic, but hopeful. Social media, which you can follow, newsletters to our volunteers. We create scientific papers using the data, and actually we influence policy. We sit on local and national bycatch working groups. So really invaluable research that must keep going. Okay, this slide is just to show you how our work sits on a national scale. So you understand this isn't what we're just doing in Cornwall. This is part of actually a European picture. So you can see the Natural History Museum is mentioned there in that slide. So the Natural History Museum has been collating records of stranded animals for a long, long time, since 1913. It was back in the 90s that then the Natural History Museum started collaboration with the Institute of Zoology to start researching cetacean populations around the UK, and that was under a contract from DEFRA, and that's when the Wildlife Trust started to work with this partnership across the UK. That is now called, and the very top logo there, CSIP, so the Cetacean Strandings Investigation Programme. That's under the management of the Institute of Zoology, and we, Cornwall Wildlife Trust and the Marine Strandings Network, are an official partner in that project, in that national project, alongside those other logos at the top there. What you've got to also remember is, just our county alone, our project contributes at least 20% of the UK data annually. So absolutely invaluable work in this county. And as I said before, at the bottom there, our other partners work really closely with BDMR, Cornwall Seal Group and the University of Exeter, of course. So this is a bar graph of all the strandings, or cetacean strandings, from 1995 to present day. So I haven't got 2020 data, we're still processing it, still coming in, and we're still processing it, and we'll create the 2020 report this year. What you can see there is 2019 was a really high year again for cetacean strandings in Cornwall. Quite a shocking number, and shows that our work is still absolutely needs to be happening. What we can also say is that we really do record pretty much every animal that comes into this coastline. Thanks to the work and dedication of Jan and Jeff Loveridge, back in from 2000 onwards, they really raised the profile of the project, the way that it worked, the policies, the working practices. They did incredible work, which made it what it is today. So we do have a high profile. We do get all these animals called into us, and that is really quite a true picture of what is happening, certainly in the last 20 years. 2020 data, although it's not up there, I'll just let you know, it is looking lower, but we had 3 months of almost zero records when everybody was fully locked down in March 2020, and people were actually not going anywhere and following the rules. The bottom right-hand map shows the locations of strandings in 2019. So just wanted to show you that they do come in all around the county. Right. Now this table isn't particularly interesting, apologies. What I want you to know that this is the PM, this is the post-mortem cause of death results of 2019. So in that year, 34 animals were suitable for post-mortem. The ones there that are highlighted in yellow show a cause of death of bycatch. So that's 12 were bycaught, which equates to 35%. So over a third of the animals that we are monitoring are dying due to accidental bycatch in fishing gear. And that's basically, again, and this is similar to previous years, so previous reports, and you can read our reports to get past data, that ultimately bycatch is a significant cause of death in Cornwall stranded cetaceans. And it's an issue that Cornwall Wildlife Trust has been highlighting and campaigning against for a long time, and we continue to do so, as I mentioned. Now, what you've got to remember, it's not just post-mortems. So as you heard just then, only 34 animals out of 245 5, which stranded in 2019, went to post-mortem. So what about the 211 carcasses that were left behind? You know, we're losing invaluable data there. Now, about 50% of those remaining carcasses that weren't suitable for post-mortem will be pretty rotten, or it may be that we couldn't get one of our trained volunteers out to site, it got washed out to sea again, the site was dangerous or inaccessible for a variety of reasons. So we lose about 50%, about 100 animals won't be suitable for further investigation apart from the core data that we collect. There is, though, however, the other 50% that we can do something with, and the Wildlife Trust have developed something over a long period of time with a lot of expertise called BEEP, which is the Bycatch Evidence Evaluation Protocol. This is an invaluable tool for assessing bycatch in situ on the beach by trained volunteers. So we take detailed photographs of the carcasses, we use those photographs to assess and identify and record these signature external injuries and features which we have identified through our experience and research as associated with bycatch and entanglement in fishing gear. So it's a really extraordinary piece of research. It's pretty groundbreaking. We're very proud of it, and we've got a fantastic member of staff, Nikki Clear, who's now working at JNCC. She was at the Trust, she's now at JNCC. She is doing with the University of Exeter an MSc on this BEEP protocol, which is wonderful, and we hope to get some papers published out of that in the future. So of the 109 carcasses that didn't go to post-mortem, but that were BEEP assessed on the beach, 26 were defined as definite bycatch. That's another 23% of those carcasses were definite bycatch. And that definite is supported by our pathologist. It's signed off by our pathologist and reviewed by CSIP. So here's a photo of bottlenose dolphin. This was found stranded in Foy in 2018. It's a really bottlenose dolphins are always a really interesting stranding, as of course, as you've heard from Shauna, it may be associated with one of our southwest inshore population of resident bottlenose dolphins. So they always cause a bit of a stir when they come in. And now when we BEEP assess a carcass, most features are actually very, very subtle, and they take a very trained eye. And at the moment, only very trained and experienced BEEP assessors can do the BEEP assessment. However, here, I think it's obvious to all of you watching that we have some obvious external injuries amputated just below its dorsal fin. It's quite an astounding photograph. Now, the map in the bottom right-hand corner is where all the bycatch strandings came in during 2019. So you can see that although they do occur around our coastline, we do have a high concentration along the south coast of Cornwall. So that's really interesting. And as I said, you know, bycatch is a problem. The Trust have, you know, continued to work with NGOs, government organisations and universities to do something about it. We ran pinger trials in 2009 to 2013. This is a fantastic illustration to demonstrate how pingers work in trying to prevent dolphins and porpoises getting caught up in fishing nets. And we continue to work on bycatch, as I said, today as part of these working groups locally and nationally. Now, although bycatch represents a third of Cornwall's strandings, it's not the only cause of death. Dan's mentioned it a lot actually in his presentation. Infection diseases and natural causes do account for a significant proportion, but we also discover other anthropogenic issues, such as this photo here, and that's boat strike. So the main photo is a common dolphin which stranded at Tolcon Beach this year, actually in February, which has, as you can see, clear, quite shocking propeller injuries, almost an amputation, and so right across the body, and damage to its tail and its rostrum. So it's a boat strike, propeller strike. And the top right-hand corner was a baby common dolphin in Gunwallow on the Lizard in the summer last year, which did go to post-mortem, and the pathologists did determine that the cause of death was head trauma, most likely to be caused by boat strike. So that came during a time when we were getting a lot of reports of to the Cornwall Marine and Coastal Code Group, which the Trust coordinate, of issues of marine disturbance in that area of the county. And this sort of research is therefore helping us provide evidence to tackle that problem of marine disturbance in the county as well, not just bycatch. Now, this table, just to finish the presentation, the table in the top left is really out of date, actually. I apologise. I really need to get another one from CSIP. It's the post-mortem results from 1990 to 2011. It's also quite depressing. I remember when that was a really current table. So I've been at the Trust a long time. It finishes this talk demonstrating that there are a range of causes of death. And there are issues that we can highlight from studying these incredible animals that wash up around our shore. And some of you may be surprised to see in that list, in the top 5 list of causes of death, is actually bottlenose dolphin kills. Which, you know, is an issue that we can do very little to mitigate about, but it is an example of the fascinating insight we can get into the ecologies of these animals through these stranding investigations. So that animal there, harbour porpoise on Maritime Beach last January, had extensive internal injuries. It had external rake marks from the bottlenose dolphins all over its body, behind its eye and its tail. But then when it was post-mortemed, it had extensive trauma inside its body. So, and in the case of bottlenose dolphin attack, it's often post-mortem that we require diagnosis from, because external injuries may be absent. So we need post-mortem to really discover what's going on. So I'll finish there because our time is up, which it really is. I recommend that if you want to learn more about strandings and the lessons that we learn from our research, please download and read our reports off our website, follow us on social media, and attend our next forum, which potentially will be this autumn in person, if it's safe and responsible to do so. But also, again, get your phones out and pop that hotline in immediately. So if you come across any dead organic material around our coastline in Cornwall, please call it in. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Abby. We've got questions for you, and just because you were on time and kept the time doesn't mean to say we're not going to give you questions. You're not going to get rewarded that. Abby, were the common dolphins who were PM'd otherwise seemingly healthy? From Hannah Wilson.
Well, we obviously, so we post-mortem a selection of animals. I can't think specifically what common dolphin you're talking about. I'm guessing you're sort of saying generally they can look externally often really fresh, and there is nothing obvious to the cause of death when it comes in. So we can only identify cause of death once it goes for post-mortem. That can happen, yes.
And just a little fill-up for all of the speakers from Sammy Cook. Just wanted to thank you for how informative this webinar is. A lot of this information is new to me. I'm shocked and grateful for all your work just entering the environmental science field. B asks, are teeth gathered for aging in the post-mortem process?
No, James doesn't gather teeth. I mean, Dan, you've probably attended more post-mortems than I have ever, but I don't think James does collect teeth. But, you know, we do often get research questions coming to us and CSIP, and they will potentially provide the materials required for that research, you know, whether it's blubber, 4P, CB, concentrations, etc. Dan, teeth?
Yeah, we do take teeth samples on post-mortem, but they are stored for future research, so there might be some potential for a project there for someone at some point.
There you go. I haven't been to post-mortem for too long.
Megan asks, what is neoplasia?
Neoplasia?
It's cancer. Just a different kind of a generic thing for cancer. Elizabeth's asking, how are the Pinger trials' success evaluated, apart from there being none in the net?
Well, that's a whole nother presentation. So Brendan, you're going to have to sort that out. I mean, we do it on acoustic monitoring. So we look at activity level around the nets with pingers and activity level of cetaceans around the nets without pingers using acoustic monitoring devices called pods. Is that a good conclusion?
Yeah, yeah. And then it's not Eddie, it's Edie Freestone. Are there any anthropogenic stressors that could result in increased bottlenose dolphins' interactions with common dolphins?
Oh gosh, I mean, I am no expert on that. So not as far as I'm aware. Again, Dan, Duncan, Shauna. I I don't think they know, like so much of the sea. I don't think they know so little about why these things occur, why bottlenose dolphins choose to do what they do with common dolphins and harbour porpoises. Anything to add? The rest of the crew? No, thanks.
Duncan has asked, are there any studies looking at the possibility that foraging habitat exclusions might occur as a result of pinger use? Well,
that is one of always one of the questions when you review what this sort of tool against mitigation of bycatch. The pingers that we advocate as a wildlife trust are very intimate. They have a small range, 150-meter range, compared to pingers that are enforced on some vessels over 12 meters, which have a 2-kilometer range. So, we see them as a better option for our inshore fishing fleet. We also know that Nick Tregenza, our CWT trustee and founder of Chelonia, who create the sea pods, has done research on habituation. I can't say the word, it's been a long day. Habituation. Can you just say it for me, Brendan?
Habituation,
thank you, of cetaceans around pingers, and they show that there is none. The minute the pingers are removed from the areas, cetaceans return. So that's not a concern.
Just looking at the chat, which we will save and send on to you, Abby, there are people interested in learning how to be a beep assessor and people interested in it being mainstreamed around the world. Does that make you want to say something else?
Definitely, because I'm sure you agree, Brendan, it's that, Nikki is doing this research, and it may be suitable for the University of Exeter students, particularly. We're sort of looking at the audience who could take part in this research that Nikki is leading on beep and beep assessment. So there may be the opportunity for people to get involved in the future and just keep an eye on Wildlife Trust stuff online, social media.
Yeah, so follow Cornwall Wildlife Trust on social media and you'll find out everything. Helen Chadwick does say that that James does take teeth, and I think with that we'll probably draw it to a conclusion and consider a rip-roaring success, and thank all of our speakers and thank all of our attendees. We may ask Dan if you'll be so kind as to record that again offline, because we had bandwidth challenges during his talk, and then that will mean that anybody that really wants the detail of his talk can go back to it and actually hear all of the words. I could understand it, but I think for some people it might have been a wee bit worse. So brilliant session, everybody. Thank you very much to Megan for organising it. Thanks for all the speakers. And thanks to all those volunteers out there that feed into these programs that have started to elaborate what's going on under the sea. Thank you very much.
Thank you.